I am often asked, how do I break into content strategy? Or how do I break into UX design? Or how do I transition from another job into a content profession? So I would like to introduce Jessica Reed, the Vice President, Product Marketing and Content Strategy at NBC Universal, who's going to talk about just that. Welcome, Jessica. Are you with us?
I'm with you. Thanks, Jack.
Well, over to you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Hopefully the sharing of my PowerPoint is as successful as it was when we tested. Tell me, somebody, that you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
Excellent. So I am really excited to be here. Thank you, Jack, for inviting me. As Jack said, I'm the VP of Product Marketing and Content Strategy for NBC Universal. And I'm going to take you on my content journey today, which I've decided is totally a thing. So I want to start just by level setting a little bit about what NBC Universal is. Since this is a technology focused conference, I want to point out that NBC Universal is lots of different things. And you'll see up top premium content. So content in this context is a little bit different. We're talking about premium video content. But NBCU, as I'm sure you could guess from NBC and Universal, is both NBC the network, but also really 13 different television networks, plus Comcast acquired Sky in 2018. And so we're also in the process of integrating our NBC Universal advertising business with our Sky business. And all of this brings together their television networks. Plus, we've got film studios. You may not know this, but NBC Universal owns Illumination, DreamWorks, Focus Features. There's the Universal Studios, the theme parks. And our distribution is really across the board. It's television, it's desktop, it's mobile. There's e-commerce capabilities built in. We have social first work that we do. And pre-COVID, there were experiential experiences. And then we also have global capabilities. We have data and targeting solutions, insights and measurement and custom research, as well as custom creative solutions. So that's just a little peek into NBC Universal as a whole. And I report into the advertising part of the business, which is responsible for selling all of the advertising across all of this. So where do I fit into that placemat? I'm responsible really for communicating the value proposition of all of the technology solutions that are the foundation for everything on that previous slide. So that's one sheets, it's product pitch decks, it's product education, it's information architecture kind of across the board. It could be UX language. It's really about finding all the different ways to leverage both technical communications and product marketing and sales enablement into really a single practice. And all of this my team does in deep collaboration with product, which is the organization we report into, with strategy, with sales, with PR, with marketing, with learning and development. It's really across the board. And then the other part of my work life, which I'm deeply passionate about, and I'm really excited to see a diversity and inclusion track at LavaCon this year, is DEI. I'm very passionate about DEI and very outspoken. And I'm the communications chair for the Out at NBC Universal LGBTQ+ ERG in New York City. And I'm the chief story officer, which is obviously a totally made up title, for BOLD, which is our advertising and partnerships, but increasingly outside of advertising and partnerships organization for building opportunity for leadership and diversity. And I also have a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, which when you report into a business unit like advertising sales is totally like having an MBA, except completely different. And those on the right-hand side are just a few of my poetry publications, just to show you that I'm not making up that I'm a poet. So, in other words, I'm all of the things that kill a conversation. So if you guys haven't seen this cartoon, it's one of my favorites, and I'm just gonna read it to you. 3 ways to get out of a conversation. So what do you do? Interpretive dance mostly. So what do you do? I draw the chalk outlines at crime scenes. So what do you do? I'm a technical writer. Now, I'm increasingly getting better at explaining what I do, but I think all of the things that I work on slash do fall into this bucket of 3 ways to get out of a conversation, whether the label is product marketer, whether it's content strategist, whether it's poet. But the thing that brings all of this together is language. And it's funny, it wasn't planned, but Beryl talking about finding common ground and common language is exactly what I'm going to talk about and what I feel really passionate about. So, how did I get here? It started, as most things do, in North Carolina. I grew up in Asheville in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. This background is what it looks like in the fall, which is the absolute best time to visit. And I was an all around content nerd. Just anything that had to do with words and content was totally my jam. And I had not the best upbringing, and reading and writing really became how I made sense of a world that often could be really dark. So this was everything from being the managing editor of my high school newspaper, to being a finalist for the North Carolina Writing Award, to spending a summer studying poetry at the North Carolina Governor's School. And also I was really into horror fiction. And so you'll see on this slide the very well-known zine On Night's Wings, the vampire and horror magazine for the discriminating fan. When I was 16, back when the internet was called Prodigy, I submitted on a bulletin board, and my very first publications were 2 terrible short stories with illustrations bordering on obscene that came in an envelope marked readers 18 and older. And at the same time, like any good angsty lesbian teenager worth her salt, I really delved into poetry. And I've discovered the beat poets, of course, who doesn't? Lawrence Ferlinghetti being my favorite. But I also discovered Adrienne Rich, and she was somebody who really changed how I saw poetry, how I saw the way that you could speak about yourself in the context of language. And her book that I go back to is The Dream of a Common Language. She was a Southern lesbian poet, kind of like me, and she really wrote about women on the margins. She saw women being pushed out, and she wanted to find a place for them on the page, especially queer women like herself. And I mention this because language, again, is the thread. It's the common thread, but it's also what brought me into a career in content. So from North Carolina, went on to college where I studied English and creative writing, but also where I began my tech writing career without actually knowing that that's what I was doing. My job on campus was as an IT consultant. That's what they called us. We basically were help desk consultants who helped our students figure out how to print, how to use Netscape Navigator, what to do when their floppy disks made that weird click, click, click sound and they couldn't get any of their files off. And as part of our jobs, we actually documented step-by-step instructions for the different solutions that we came up with. And we kept a library of that documentation. And because I just thought that was part of IT support, I, instead of becoming the elbow padded professor that I'd originally planned, after finishing college, went into a career in IT. And as an IT, whether it was on a help desk, whether it was when I was an IT manager, as I moved across from different cities, from London to Toronto to Buffalo, and then finally to New York City, I made documentation part of every job. And so I would document common procedures and processes, and I actually wrote an entire user guide for software that I implemented for the creative services department at the University at Buffalo, because the documentation that came with the product was terrible. And so I moved to New York, and that's finally where I became officially a tech writer. I hated being an IT manager. I have so much respect for people who work in IT. It was not for me, and I did it for a long time. And I got to a point when I had moved to New York and I was doing my master's that I just couldn't do it anymore. And I saw this job on Craigslist. Craigslist, I know this was 150 years ago. Remember, I first discovered the internet was Prodigy. So found this job on Craigslist for a tech writer and really just lucked out in that they were willing to take a chance on me, but also in that my career really grew there. So I started at this company called Donovan Data Systems, DDS for short. So everyone thought I worked in a dental office, and originally was a junior tech writer, and quickly moved up to the lead tech writer for the largest documentation set for the company. And DDS was a company that really valued documentation. It was honestly one of the best places I could have started my career. I really learned how to be a tech writer. I learned FrameMaker. I learned what contextual help was. I learned what all of the tech writing things were. But I also saw that there were communications that weren't coming out of tech pubs that really should have been in the same language as the technical publications. And so I eventually became the technical editor for the company and really reviewed whether it was instructional design materials, pure technical communications, even the marketing comms before they went out to clients to ensure that everything was in a consistent voice, that it followed the style guide that we came up with. That was when I became really excited about style guides. That's when you know you're a real content nerd, is when you walk around saying that you're team Oxford comma, which I am, by the way, team Oxford comma. Don't argue with me on this. And then from there, I moved to a small digital ad tech company called Maxifier. And again, hired really to do documentation initially, but eventually was also doing product management. So actually helping roll out releases of our products and helping steward marketing materials. And really, again, like just finding that way to bridge, as Beryl was saying, to bridge those silos, to bring those different types of content together and really create a unified voice across the company. And while I was at Maxifier, this global e-commerce company reached out to me. They were pivoting from a startup to an enterprise business and wanted someone to come in and run their technical writing team. And I resisted for as long as I could, but it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, and started there as the tech writing manager and eventually was managing all of the product communications and content strategy for the company, whether it was B2B communications, B2C communications, release notes, API documentation, even managing translation files. Really anything that had to do with content came through my team, to the point that I actually was referred to as the voice of Borderfree. And then Borderfree got acquired by Pitney Bowes. And right around that time, the former CEO of Maxifier joined NBC Universal and was building out this new data-enabled advertising startup within NBCU ad sales, and asked if I wanted to come along. And I've been here for 5 years. I actually just hit my 5-year mark last week. And again, hired to do initially documentation, but this was a new organization, a new technology practice within a media company that really had not had this type of group before. And they didn't have technical writers, and they also didn't have product marketers. And so it became clear pretty quickly that there needed to be somebody to fill that gap. And lucky me, I was the gap filler. And so again, like just finding that place, finding that niche where you can just fill the spaces that need to be filled. And I've been there ever since. And that startup within NBC Universal is now actually no longer a startup. It's the Enterprise Foundation for all audience-based data-enabled advertising for NBC Universal. And as I said earlier, I now lead product marketing for all of the technology that's coming out of advertising and partnerships. So what's the point? Here are some of the things that I've learned along my journey. First of all, product marketing is not the dark side. When I first started going to tech writing conferences, there was this real resistance to marketing. And I feel like I still see that. And for a long time, even I was like, I don't do product marketing. I'm a technical writer. I do technical communications. But the reality is that product content, whether it's product marketing, product education, technical documentation, UX writing, it's all marketing. All of it's marketing. There's no way around that. It's all about how you present the brand. It's all about how you present the voice of the company. And bringing all of that content together more efficiently, bridging those silos, as Beryl said, that really is more efficient and it's better for your brand. Otherwise, you have content that feels like it's coming from 15 different companies. And you shouldn't limit yourself to one type of content. Again, I was that person who was like, I'm just a tech writer. And I say just a tech writer in quotation marks. I needed to get over this idea of what these labels meant. I needed to be open to all of the ways that I could be producing content, all of the ways that I could be contributing. Because whatever we call ourselves, language is at the center of everything we're doing. Whether it's my role as a tech writer, as a content strategist, as a product marketer, or even as a poet, it's all about language. And the power of language cannot be overstated. I want to be really clear about this because it's beyond product communications and technical communications and product marketing. Going back to that book from Adrienne Rich, The Dream of a Common Language, everything we do comes down to language, whether it's finding the best way to communicate the value proposition of our products to a client, whether it's finding ways to bring marginalized voices into conversations. Language has the power to break down barriers. It has the power to change hearts and minds. And yes, it has the power to sell. And whether it's business communications or whether it's trying to just change the way that people talk about the world, we really cannot ignore the power of language. And that is what a career in content for me is all about. So thank you so much for having me. And I wanted to note that the other thing that cannot be overstated is the power of alpaca hugs. And I will leave you with this picture of me and my wife hugging an alpaca in Ireland.
Okay, Jessica, go ahead and stay on the phone for a second. So we are actually trying to get an alpaca in one of our Zoom meetings. So spoiler alert. And I have to tell you that there were so many people in the chat window agreeing with you and virtually nodding their head at everything you said during your session. And I truly believe there's a convergence of marketing and TechComm where documentation is now looked at before the sales cycle, and companies are looking at the product documentation and the user experience before buying the product. And now that we're going to a subscription model, a lot of the people, if they don't like how to use the product, if it's too hard to use, they'll just go to a different product. So I absolutely agreed with everything you said. So everybody, let's give a sign language round of applause to Jessica.